So look, I'm gonna start off here. Thank you everyone for joining us. Our attendees are growing now, so we're at 20 now, which is awesome. So firstly, I just want to say thank you to All Squares. Obviously, I'm working with All Squares. We are a full stack talent agency. We specialize in finding people and working with businesses who have technology at their core. We work across digital, being delivery, design, data, engineering, and of course, product, which is why we're here. So, I mean, feel free to head to allsquares.com.au, understand what we're working on, but as well, take a casual approach. Add myself, Danny Hansard, Julian Viard, come have a chat. If you want to understand what's out there on the market, we'd love to be of help, and yeah, just really have a chat with you. And what we also want to do is really sponsor events and utilize our networks to the wider community, and helping set up platforms such as Product Hackers for ideas to be shared, to have awesome speakers to really utilize industry knowledge, and to pass that on to our networks, which is where we have today, Product Hackers, and I'll pass that on to you, Sev, to take over.
Sure. Can you hear me, mate?
Yeah, we can all hear you.
All good. So thanks everyone for joining us today for the first, hopefully, of many Product Hackers. Hopefully we're going to set this up at a same time every couple of weeks on a Friday, to give you the chance to step back on a Friday, do some learning. I think one of the things that's really important to me, and probably the reason we started Product School 18 months ago, was because I really believe that you can learn through doing, and you can learn through books, but the best way of learning is actually through sharing experiences. And we wanted to do that, and that's why we started the Product School meetup, which has grown significantly. And we shared a lot of different stories from people with different perspectives. And just because we're in this current situation where we're all physically distanced, it doesn't really mean that we need to stop learning. And actually, in some senses, we got access to more people from a variety of different walks of life. And I think it's really important that we continue to share our experiences and grow together. I think they have a term for this, actually. They sort of call it like learning 1.0, learning 2.0, learning 3.0. And learning 1.0 is like, the teacher basically says, you go and learn this. And learning 2.0 is there's some dialogue that you can ask some questions, but the teacher is still the expert and is telling you the answers. And then we live in this massively complex world at the moment. So sort of learning 3.0 is actually, there's many different ways to solve a problem, and we all come from different perspectives. And actually, this is what we're trying to create through this experience. So we're really lucky today to have three awesome speakers join us, and they're going to touch on a subject which is really interesting. One is around scale-ups, and I think we often hear that word. You hear the word, I don't know if you guys have read the book called Blitzscaling by Reid Hoffman, but there are various definitions. I think the definition of a scale-up is an organization that has found product market fit and has been growing at 20% or greater year on year for 3 years. For me, that's sort of like one. For me, I often feel, and my background is like, I've worked in startups and then in larger organizations, larger organizations. And from a product perspective, what it feels like to me is like, something that I can do at a startup for $10,000. I know, and if I'm at a good scale up, maybe it'll cost me $100,000. Maybe if I'm in something super inefficient, it might cost me $1 million. So from a product perspective, that's what it feels like to me. And there's people with some really unbelievable skills, and your skills need to change, your processes need to change when you are in these scale ups. And so we've got some great speakers today to tell us about this. And so the three speakers, so we've got Julian, who is currently the CTO at, I'm going to get this name wrong, but I think it's Equium. And okay, good, thumbs up, that's good. So I was looking at your LinkedIn, he's got an amazing background, taking companies from smaller to listed. And also, he's going to talk to us about something that I'm really interested in, which is principles of engineering at scale-ups. Following on from that, we're going to have Thomas, who's got a super new, exciting role at ABS CBN, but prior to that, he was at iFlix, and I remember last year having a beer with him and discussing it, and it's a fascinating story, taking a user base from, you know, the single-digit millions to the double-digit millions across Asia Pacific, which introduces even more complexity as well. So super interesting story there. And last but definitely not least, we've got Teresa, who really started off, I think, as a business analyst, and now is, you know, a product lead at Medibank. Has got an amazing story where she's worked across health, she's worked across financial services, she's got a lot of different perspectives, and I'm really looking forward to it. Actually, my career paths are not dissimilar in a lot of ways, so I'm really looking forward to hearing from her. So logistically, we're going to have 3 lightning talks. You can type in your questions at any time, and we will get to see those questions. Not everyone else will see those questions. At the end of the 3 talks, I'll start asking some questions, but if you want to verbally ask a question, you can raise your virtual hand and we will unmute you. Sammy is kindly producing this, so pressure's on him to press all the right buttons. And yeah, I think that is about it. We're going to try, if technology allows us, to do a couple of cool polls as well. So while the guys are talking, I'm going to try and do a couple of relevant polls and post them as well. But if the technology doesn't allow us, we may not get to that. That being said, I'll hand over now to Julian.
We'll get started with Julian. Seb, the term, my role is the DJ. I'm the video DJ. That's what I'm calling myself.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay.
I'm gonna shut everyone's videos off, including myself, except for Seb and Jules. And Jules, if you want to share your screen, feel free to. But yeah, just give me one.
Yeah. I have a few slides I'll zip through. Lightning talk under 10 minutes, yeah?
That's it.
Go for it, man.
It's going to be tough. There'll be no fluff. All right. I'll bring up, I've got a small amount of artwork. I'll bring it up. We'll talk to it. All right. I've got Zoom in my way. Let me try that. How's that working, DJ?
Yeah, it's working. Yeah. Sweet.
The Zoom stuff is doesn't come through the video, the sharing, yeah? The Zoom stuff on my screen is not blocking the screen at the moment?
No. That's all good. It's coming through.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for the interest, Evan. I think you've given me a good segue. And the sort of, as I was thinking about how to write up, and I was thinking about this a little bit, sort of capturing some of my loose and a little bit crazy thoughts. Summing it up is growing up isn't easy. I think it's kind of a good segue from where you left it. I think the way I was thinking about it, I'm going to go forward. There we go. I think the early stage of a startup often feels like a party. And when you and it feels very, very comfortable, and you don't know what you don't know, and you're doing experiments, and there's nothing really to prove. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and obviously you hope that it does. But it's kind of relaxing and really good fun in the very, very early days. And then as you get to a scale up, there's this ongoing question in your mind which is, are we flying yet? And this is the more memorable scene from Ferris Bueller for me. And it ends in tragedy. And everyone thinks of a really, really happy comedy, but I see Ferris Bueller as a tragedy because this car doesn't end well. And you don't want your company to be in that situation, right? So you want to have the fun, you want to get to growth, you want to get to scale, but you don't want to have to look back and it all comes crashing down. So what just happened? So when I think about growing companies, and if you're trying to distill it down, it's very much a balancing act. You've got to be very, very mindful of so many different things. And for me, the number one thing is how much time have you got? And if you have managed to get the growth, that's one thing. But if you've got the growth and it's still not profitable, and you've got to consider that. So the first question is how much time, not just about your runway, but a whole lot of aspects. You know, how much time have you got to work with for whatever is the next crisis? And there's always another crisis. You got to understand deeply where value comes from, and this is where the interplay between the product and the technology is absolutely critical. As you're someone, you know, in a leadership position, making calls on where this company is going, you deeply have to understand the value. I think in terms of scaling a company reliable, time is actually more critical, at least in one way of looking at it, but you deeply have to understand where the value comes from. And then you've got to have some architectural goals if you're going to not waste time. And that's something I hate doing, you know, when you're time poor and if you're managing burn and cash flow, you don't want to spend, you know, as I've mentioned, you know, millions of dollars in a particular direction only to have a go out the window because you're making the wrong call. So you've got to have the goals and you've got to be able to play them in the right order. And then you're off to the races. When I'm thinking about time, it comes from so many different factors. I always work on a multiplier of 10. You know, if the CEO comes to me and says, "Hey, I want 100,000 additional users in the next month," then I'm going to assume I need to have a platform that can deal with 1 million users in the next month. And that's not for a vanity exercise and not to throw more money at hardware, but if we are growing at scale and if we have got 20% recurring growth, a multiple of 10 actually isn't that much lead time. All right. So if you're getting a 1/5 growth every month or every year, whatever that growth factor is, 10 times is not that much. And so it's not a vanity exercise. It's very much, if you're only looking at the very, very short term, what your numbers are going to be next month, you're not giving yourself any time to breathe, and you're just going to be constantly fighting a fight. So absolute 10 or even 100 times the expected numbers, volumes, whatever is important in terms of running the business, that's got to be your baseline for where you're targeting your architecture and where you're targeting. And you got to factor out what that means in terms of what you apply is to be decided. But think of it, when you're doing simulations or you're doing calculations, 10 times is critical. Other things that come into time, you've got to understand how the BD operating, and you've got to understand deal close time. A real average, not some optimistic, yep, it's going to be signed next week, it's going to be signed next week, especially if you're doing B2B deals and there's big investment involved and possibly product fit involved on a company by company, client by client basis. You really got to have a good sense of feel for how often those deals are going to land before you can make architectural decisions down the track. You've got to understand your performance bottlenecks and when they're going to blow up next. You know, how much lead time have you got inside the product, inside the architecture before it falls over? You might have to be looking at next investment rounds, and you might have to hit certain goals and certain uptime goals or whatever it is. When I was at What If, we were re-architecting the platform as we were going into IPO, and we had critical timelines we were trying to get to and reduce the downtime because the IPO was literally banging on our doorsteps, and we couldn't have any outages leading up to that. It would have had a huge impact on the launch. Cash burn is obviously one for time. And operational choke points is critical as well. If you've done MVPs and you've been doing it for a long time, you've skimped and run experiments, and you haven't really finished the product, not only from a customer perspective, but from an operational perspective, right? You might be doing manual processes in the back end, reconciliation or billing runs or whatever it is, and you've been living with it for a while, and depending on the personalities involved, no one might be complaining about it, but you might have really key strategic bottlenecks in the business that you could apply a little bit of technology to and give you the ability not to hamper growth. So time's critical. I mentioned value at the outset. Value comes in many different shapes and sizes. If you're going for a pure acquisition play and it's just about using numbers, great. Then what does that mean in terms of growth? If you have got positive cash flow, you've got users paying for real features, what are they paying for? But critical to scale up, one part of scale up is going to be discarding and changing what the experiments were. Not every experiment is a success. Not every MVP turns into a raging product that's going to be on the cover of Wired next month. And so you've got to be on the lookout for stuff to be discarded. You've got to look for competitors. You see not what they are doing and try and copying them. That just ends up in an arms race. Don't do that. Look at what competitors aren't doing. Now look at what opportunities you've got for extending your product in a way that people haven't seen before, haven't thought of, to differentiate yourself in the market and add value in that way, rather than trying to play catch up with your competitors. And number one thing is, what can you do to lengthen the runway, right? Is there some big opportunity in terms of a different market segment that would generate revenue, or a singular valuable client that you could, if you had one extra piece of feature or one additional capability in the product, would open that door. And sometimes it involves compromise. You don't want to be a product company that's always giving just what the client wants, just what the client wants. It pulls the product in so many different directions. You end up with a very easily developed Frankenstein if you're not careful. But there are still strategic opportunities when a client emerges that could dramatically change the trajectory of the company. You can't ignore those just for the sake of the product. You've got to work with the business side and figure out what's the right choice. So with that in mind, you've got the time constraints, and you've got the understanding, a deep understanding of the value. Then we start distilling that down, and from a very selfish perspective in our little technology world, what do we need to think of? What do we need to do next? And obviously, in a big company, maybe you've got the luxury of doing multiple of these things at once. But in the real world, when you're growing and you're still struggling to get break even or positive cash flow, then you've got to start prioritizing this sort of stuff. You've got to pick a few of these. But starting with very, very basic stuff like, what is the performance weaknesses you've got at the moment? The first thing you should do with any performance problem is throw money at it. There is no reason why money shouldn't fix most performance issues right now. You've got elastic compute from a number of very reputable vendors, whether it's Microsoft, Amazon, higher end services like a Roku. You can spend a lot of money and get a lot of bang for buck before you get real scalability problems. Again, when I was at What If, we were running the entire company on 2 servers. It was a major project to go to 3 servers. We were running our own. And so going to 3 servers was a huge job for us. We had huge caching issues we had to deal with. These days, you don't have that sort of problem. You shouldn't, not until you get to massive scale, should you be really worrying about the cost of your compute platform. It shouldn't come into it. You do need to understand where any crashes and errors and any bugs are. Not because you should be fighting bugs. You should have continuous testing and integrations and automated deployments that should cover the basic stuff and the hygiene factors. What I'm talking about is when there are just those unexpected things slipping into production and you can't seem to get your handle on it. You're running so fast, maybe 2-3 years ago, building out something a little bit complex. Maybe it's a monolith code base that's just got so much piled into it now. Some of the interplays are a little bit subtle. You don't see them until they get live in production. Even if you can't fully understand and solve for those complexities, maybe those complexities are inherent in the solution you're trying to provide, then you can still deal with it. If that becomes your bottleneck to growth, right, then you need to take that out from where it is so you can surgically enhance it. And so that's where you do start to look at things like microservices, not for the sake of it again, but because by putting something that's complex into a single code base, a separate code base, you're isolating the complexity of that particular problem. You're isolating the bugs into that problem, and you can either start with just a carve out from the code, or you can start with a rebuild and put an API around it and go from there. But that's definitely one. Don't go microservices for nuts. But in terms of being able to scale independent pieces, and in terms of isolating complexity, it's a huge lever to pull. Likewise with caching. Caching isn't always the silver bullet. You can't always just fix something by putting a cache and a cache and a cache on front of it. But sometimes if you look at the content flow, sometimes you've got data that's write once and read 1 million times. And that doesn't need to be in an operational platform where you're doing truckloads of joins and all sorts of other stuff. Again, using what if as an example, we had 4 JSPs, 4 pages out of the entire platform that took 94% of the page hits. And one of the first big architectural changes we made from a monolithic code base was to just split out those 4 pages into their own services so that they could be standalone and scaled independently from all the rest of the admin screens and the curation and stuff. And so it's not just about looking at the data, but actually looking at the way content is flowing through your solution, where you can say, right, the read characteristics of this are different to the write characteristics over here. This is where we cut the line, and then we can, scale things differently. And I've got a transaction problem over here, and I've got a throughput problem over here. And now you don't have one thing that's got multiple problems. And so, that's how you start drawing your boundaries through your product base in order to get a scalable platform that allows you to stay ahead of the business, not be a barrier to growth. I come back to the ops point again. You really want, as you're doing the product and roadmap strategy for technology, you really want to understand where in the business are they struggling to do their day-to-day jobs, right? Not just from a technology perspective, but from a whole lens perspective across the whole company. And it is it's the technology function of the organization. If you're at all part of that as part of the product, and you probably should be, then how are you helping scale the whole business by solving some of those operational needs, by deploying some of your engineering effort, deploying some of your technical nous to solve some of the sort of problems. And sometimes you'd be amazed at what a small amount of effort in the right place, it's like a fulcrum and a lever, can radically lift the scalability of the company. Even if it's not sexy, the clients mightn't see it, users mightn't touch it, but you're possibly just giving yourself an extra 6 months runway in the business. And the final point I'll say before I wrap up is recruiting is everyone talks about recruiting when you're talking about growth and how hard it is to get talent, and obviously it is. And the way I've successfully dealt with that and is to find where is the pain point in your team and in your organization, well, particularly in your team. You get selfish here when you're recruiting. You're recruiting for you and your team to make sure that if they're struggling in a particular area, right, and then you have a frank conversation as a team, don't tell me how you're going to do better next week. Let's agree on what we need to plug the gap that we've got. There's only so many hours that we can do in the day. And if we need someone else with an additional skill set, let's get that in and plug that gap so we've got some more capacity. And whether it's project management, whether it's UI design, whether it's DevOps, or just another 5 developers to feed up the huge number of requests that are coming in. Just have an open conversation about it, but don't recruit to some magical org chart that you think is going to solve the problem, because generally next time you recruit someone, they're going to have a few different skills over here, and it's the jigsaw comes together of your team. It comes together person by person, and trying to start with some perfect jigsaw where everyone's going to fit into it too early ends up you spend a lot of time going, oh, is this the perfect fit? But well, you get the next person in that's going to solve the problem, maximize their potential in the team, and then find out what's next. So those are the goals. It's nothing terribly technical here. You can go deeper into the weeds. I'm happy to answer questions around some of this technical, but I think this applies to whatever technology you're using, whether you're doing rewrites or whatever. This is the thinking landscape that we've been using for a few years in the organizations that I've been that's been effective. And I think the reason this works well for me is this is a saying I've been using for a few years now. In isolation, everything is ambiguous, but in context, everything is common sense. So when you're looking at all the possibilities of what you could do with a scale up and with the technology platform that you're trying to improve on, or the product you're trying to grow, it can be overwhelming. Right? If you're just starting with a blank thing, and you can pick any one good thing, and everyone look at, well, it's not a bad thing to do, but is it the right thing to do? And that comes from knowing in the context of how we're going for time, how we're going for what's the next value, and how do we put that together to maximize revenue, and what are our overarching goals. And you do want to take the product forward in a direction. When you've got when you know you want to split stuff out, you can't do that simultaneously with everything else that's going on. So you've got to pick your battles, and you've got to know when that you're going to do the next architectural split. You know, when you're going to add the next service, when you're going to add the next layer of caching, when you're going to start using, send mail and send, send grid instead of whatever it is whatever you change you need to make, have them racked up. But like your recruiting strategy, it's when is the next pain point hitting you? And then that's when you start saying to the CEO, okay, I'm going to take some time to go in this direction, and that's going to give us an extra 12 months growth in this particular area. Let's get it done. And that's pretty much the whole game. And you just rinse and repeat, and that you've got an overall goal. That what's next on the plan is kind of that we deal with the next pain point, go on to the next thing, go on to the next thing. That's it.
That's awesome. I really like that. I particularly like, and I've used that before as well. I don't know if I've used it as successfully as you, but the 10x sort of framing to say, like, if we're at 1,000 users, then we're looking at how we're going to scale to 10,000 and so on and so forth. I really like that frame, actually.
Yeah, it's saved me a lot of time.
And money.
And it sounds like a huge number. So why are you inflating it so high? It's just, if you've got any recurring growth, 10 times is just not that much. It's gonna hit you in the face before you know it. It'll save you. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much for that, Julian. I think next we are going to Thomas.
Hello.
You all set up?
Hear me?
Good, man.
Yeah.
Go
Alrighty.
for it.
Quick game is a good game. So let's move you, present. Okay. Hello, 10 minutes on the clock. Well, thanks for inviting me to this, Sav and Sammy. It's good to be part of. And in trying to understand who the audience was for this, it seemed reasonably broad. So I thought that I would talk about something which is a recurring theme for me across my career, which has been similar to yours, Sav and Tess, with being a BA coming out of agencies. But I've been across product delivery, design, a consultant, enterprise, agency, startups. And probably the reoccurring thing that I feel that I bring is the basics, which sounds kind of boring, but is a incredibly important foundation. So let's get into it. So I'm Thomas. I've worked across product design and delivery. I like to think that being broad across those different disciplines gives me a skill set around translation, mediation, and being really good at helping join dots across different business units and different parts of the business, the CEO to the CTO, everyone in between, marketing to content, blah, blah, blah. So I like to think that I can weave between them quite easily and get an outcome fast. So why talk about this? Let's start with why. So I think it will be useful to talk about what I consider to be some of the basics in product management. And I think it's something that is forgotten at the most senior levels, and sometimes it's not known at a junior level. And I think that those basics, especially in scale-ups, are often forgotten or missed. And I feel that oftentimes some of what I would consider to be basics are harder to reintroduce once you have scaled. And to follow on from Julian's, the architecture, both technically or from a product perspective or from a design perspective, if some of those fundamentals are not in there and things have not been considered, to retrofit can be a more complicated task to having it been in there from the first place. So as Sav mentioned, I worked for iFlix in my last job, and that was, iFlix is a streaming company. It's basically was a clone of Netflix for Southeast Asia 5 years ago. And when I joined, there was a realization that it had to be something different and it had to establish its unique value. And I sort of championed that product as their global head of product for about 2 years. So I'll just give a brief overview of what I consider to be the cool stuff, the not so cool stuff, and how that underscores the basics being missing and needing to be implemented. A quote from an old basketballer pulled from Google at the last minute, but I thought this was a good quote, and that is, champions are brilliant at the basics. And I think this ties into a bit of discipline, and getting the fundamentals right will serve you in so well in life, broadly speaking. You know, training, exercising, learning a language, it's always good to get back to those fundamentals to allow higher ordered, better, more sophisticated things to come on top. So with iFlix, the cool stuff was when I joined, there was around about 5 million monthly active users. And monthly active users is a metric which is sometimes used to gauge either growth or user base. And it's how many times does your total user base come within a monthly period once. It was across 7 platforms. That's iOS, Android TV, web, smart TV, set-top boxes. They were operating in 34 countries, and they had 5 different operations centers for engineering, content, and product design, that sort of thing. And also the job description sounded great. So that's what I sort of started with. And that gives an idea of how we were located. So across sort of 2.5 time zones, which made it a little bit difficult with communication and presented some other challenges from a technical perspective, especially with China. But that was up the top left. We're in Prague. Down the bottom, we're in Cape Town. We're in Beijing, Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, and then in Melbourne. And this was just a little graphic to show all the pings of people opening up a new session using Fabric, which has been since bought out, but it was a really cool analytics tool. Some really fun stuff, which really wasn't that useful, but it looked pretty. But again, just to show where our user base was primarily Southeast Asia, but I'll get into that. So to me, joining, I thought it was really successful. I thought, oh, okay, here we go. It's a global company. It's been around for 5 years. It's a bit of a darling in some VC circles. You know, this is going to be great. I'm going to learn, you know, what the best practice UX and product management will be, and all of that sort of stuff. And I think it was superficially successful, but underneath, well, the not so cool stuff is that there was no data. There was no user research. There was no UX team. It was a top-down culture. There was little visibility across multiple delivery teams or the business about what was being worked on. There were roadmaps based purely on opinion and not on any data or any value or fact. And the way in which the organization was structured around engineering resulted in essentially a feature factory, plus a lot more. And when Sav said we caught up over a beer, it was many beers, and it was quite a cathartic experience just to vent about my experience. But it was incredible to see a little bit behind the curtain. So in that sense, when you're in a leadership position or a non-leadership position, but in the, you know, rough area of product, when the basics are missing, where do you start? And that machine is continuing to churn and run ahead and pump out stuff. And there's a hive of activity. So some truths are that it is easy when you join a new company to be swept up, and it's easy also, once you've been there for 6 months to a year, to relax and to just to fall into delivery mode and just to pump out things. And it is hard to make changes midstream. And there's some observations both for myself and also for people I've worked with over the years that I think are truths that you sort of need to be vigilant against and to fight against in your career. So I just kind of boiled it down into what I would be saying to ask yourself continually, especially when you start. But what are the users saying about the product or service that you're in to work with or to help or to take to the next level? That's a really important question. Also, what do the stakeholders want and what informs their demand or request? And I'll get into these in more detail. How is the product performing? What's the landscape that it's operating in? All the different platforms, all the different touch points, what's happening? Also, what sort of level of debt is there? And debt, I like to think across technical, data, and experience. I kind of break them out into three, just based on my own experience. I think there is experiential debt, just the same as there is technical debt. And then once you understand all of that, what is your plan? And then how do you communicate it? So with what a user is saying, it is seeking out what information you have on users, what is available, what tools are used, how frequently it is gathered, and then how it's used. Is it used to inform decisions? And if it's not missing, that is a red flag and something that you should champion. When it comes to stakeholders and what they want, just a bit of a barometer, but if you're just being told what to do, if you're being given a list of things, build it, inquire why, what's informing this decision, how did you arrive at these as the next most valuable thing? And that'll also give you a bit of an idea of the sort of culture that the company is. And are they just chasing the next most shiny thing? That was certainly the case at iFlix when I started. We needed to turn that ship around away from just chasing shiny features towards actual value. How's the product performing? I had no visibility at iFlix. It took me about 3 weeks to get insights, and that came in the form of the spreadsheet. So we need to uplift the data democratization and the allowance of self-service to encourage curiosity. And if you can't see that, then how can you possibly know what to do with your product or how to champion the next most valuable thing and lead the team? And if you don't have it, then you need to demand it. Also, what level of debt is there? I think of debt as it always needs to be paid. And I like to think that good product managers should always pay their debts and work alongside tech and not have a bit of a competitive, just push for user value and just to push for user value and not understand that fixing technical debt can result in maybe a non-visible but enormous value. So in iFlix, we had a playback experience that was incredibly subpar, and taking sometimes between 15 to 20 seconds for the median time to playback for users in the Philippines. And that's just completely unacceptable. But that's all technical debt that we needed to fix, but the net result was more engagement, higher retained users. And then what is my plan and how should I communicate it? All I'll say is just don't overthink it. Don't worry about jazzy, fancy tooling. Just keep it really simple, but just to articulate the why, articulate what is the sequence or the ordering and the sequence and just to think about it from a perspective of who's my audience and how do I best and simply communicate this, but believe in it because you'll communicate it that much better. And all these things I needed to change at iFlix, and it wasn't just me. Obviously, I had a team of people to support me, but we took iFlix away from being very top-down and very opinion-based to being a data-driven company that was synthesizing billions of events a week across qualitative and quantitative, that had fixed its technical debt, which allowed it to move into a freemium model with an ad-supported tier, which would then begin to generate roughly 85,000 US a day. taking us on a path towards some level of profitability. This is a long story, and I could spend hours talking about it. But we also grew at the same time from 5 million to 20 million monthly active users. And that was a really big boost. And again, underscores what Julian was talking about. How do you plan when you're scaling? It's difficult, but we were taking the approach to plan for the worst, and the worst meant a lot of people coming in all at once and maintaining that resilience from an architecture perspective. Thanks. And you can find me at home or at the park.
Thanks, mate.
No worries.
Was that 5 million to 20 million?
Yeah.
Cool. And that is an amazing story, actually.
Well, that
Really
was, just to quickly touch on that, that was also through better understanding what the value of the service was. And because it was originally started as just a clone of a Western product, we needed to look a bit inwardly and look to our users and say, well, what are they watching? What do they like? What does the cultural indicators tell us? And it was the need for hyper local content. For those who grew up in Australia in the 90s, it's the water rats, it's the home and away, it's the those kind of shows that maybe we don't like as much, or maybe you do, but it was local actors, local producers, local directors. That was a massive boost for us.
Hey, what was the most popular city or country that you had the most users in? I remember you telling me, but
yeah, it was Indonesia was the biggest.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Indonesia, from a demographic perspective, is a giant that's slowly kind of awakening with a absolute massive group of under 30s coming through, and they're more educated, more tech savvy, and they've got a thirst for entertainment and digital products and services. So it was really more serving the infrastructure needs. How can we activate that distributed audience who were all looking for entertainment? And that was a very interesting technical challenge. And then also within Indonesia, finding and locking up the different content studios to generate and produce content for iFlix under the iFlix Originals banner.
Yeah, right. Crazy. Cool. Thanks very much for that. It was
Pleasure.
Very interesting. Next, we've got Teresa.
Hey guys.
There you are. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Cool. All right. I'll share my screen. Cool. Awesome. I'll be quick as well. And I think Jules and Thomas have already touched on some really key things I want to talk about today as well. Hey everyone, I'm Teresa. So I just wanted to talk about kind of my journey from being a BA to Scrum Master and then get into product management. So, and kind of the journey there, some of the key learnings I've gone along the way, and painting a little bit of picture of reality in product if you don't know much about it. So my journey started as a business analyst, just working around the big banks, aviation, in mortgage broking, and then in health as well. And so my journey was working in a Scrum team in Squad. And then later I became a Scrum Master, BA. As some of you guys know, those two roles quite, anyone can kind of help out the Scrum Masters and run the Scrum sometimes. Where I became product wasn't actually through corporate, my role in the Squad. It was actually a friend of mine was like, hey, I've got this startup idea. Do you want to join me? So I was like, yeah, sure. He taught me, you can own the product. You take it to market with me, execute it. So I learned a lot of product management through with him. And, we spent really late hours in the night working full time and then working after hours from 6 to like 3 a.m. in the morning, just take it to market, working with the offshore team, building the product as well. And he's like, here's $10 and get me, 1,000, 2,000 customers. I was like, what? That's ridiculous. Like, what? That's ridiculous. He's like, here's some articles, go read on this growth hacking. So those of you who don't know growth hacking, go Google it after this. It provided a lot of value, because from thinking in corporate, doing projects that are like tens of millions of dollars and putting it into the customer's hand, and we don't even know if it's successful or not. Being able to learn from ground up with $10, you can get 1,000 users onto the platform within a couple of months and really help you tailor the product in the right position. So for myself, then I got opportunity within one of the corporates. They realized I was running a startup outside of my full-time work hour. And that's where I kind of started evolving my role a bit further into product ownership, product management. And I've got a nice role in Medibank looking at the health system and how do we digitize health care as well. So I wanted to paint a picture. So everyone kind of go, product management, that's awesome. I want to make decisions. I know a lot of feedback about this product. Why can't we do it like Uber? Of course, we can definitely do it like Uber, but there's a lot of things that you need to be aware of before coming to product. One is you must research, all right? So you must know your domain. I'm not saying you have to research every minute of the day, but at least understand the domain, the areas, because people are going to be relying on you to kind of explain the reasons why behind certain decisions. So researching, talking to your squad, talking to other people, getting to the community like this one, and asking people who've really done the groundwork around, where's best, what's going on in the market, and then working with your customers as well to research on what do they think. The second one is actually probably what was one of my the hardest one to adjust to, is about being comfortable making decisions. So your squad actually looks up to you to be like, okay, what do we do next? And why should we do it this way? You really need to be okay to make decisions and not feel like you're making the wrong decision, but make some decision with some grounding reasoning as well. A lot of people try not to make decisions sometimes because they feel like it's going to have a negative impact on them. But when you step up into product, that's one of the ultimate things. You need to make quick decisions and to get the squad to keep running forward. Sometimes it might not be right, sometimes it might be really amazing well, but you have to learn from that as well. Keeping a positive mindset in the startup world was pretty damn hard. I'm not going to lie. You're going to fail multiple times, and even when you're in corporate, there's going to be decisions you make that it's not going to turn out right, and your squad's going to get demotivated because like, oh, we've got to do this again. Why can't the business make up their mind? But keeping a positive mindset, keep pushing your squad forward, because that end goal, the reward, is actually massive. As much as it's challenging in the product space, the reward is huge. And to be able to get there, you actually feel the atmosphere around you and your team to actually come out and be like, yeah, we're like the best team, we're winning, we're killing this. The next part I thought was really critical is around getting your foundation strong and getting it right. By learning and understanding each of the product development stages. So by taking the problem in and really figuring out what exactly is the problem. So in large corporates, they'll be like, hey, build this feature, right? And just put it in your platform. Just put it in this way. I want the button right here. But really focus on, oops, I just had a poll come through. Just really focus on how, what is actually the problem? So like Thomas said, from a top-down approach, it's quite opinionated. There's no kind of solid statistic or research being done. For us, I find that our role is actually to challenge the problem, to really decouple it and figure out where the problem actually lies. It's actually not just build this feature. Continue to optimize, evaluate. Once you've built the features out there or the product out there, don't forget to continue on monitoring your analytics, trying to fix the problem. So if not many people are using it, really figure out why. The optimization part also touches on what Jules was saying about operation. So a lot of the times in large corporates, like, here's MVP, get it out the door, just put the manual process in the back end, we'll go fix it later. That fix it later never really comes. So you need to actually give yourself some space and help the operation team to fix the manual process, make it automated, because by making things automated, by reducing some of the tech debt, you can actually scale a lot faster on your platform. You can actually build and optimize a lot faster as well. So give yourself that kind of room when you're working with your backlog. And last one is, it's actually okay to fail. So it's not the end of the world. There are multiple models, and when I worked at one of the big corporates, they had an innovation lab, and they had this big massive board. The culture was to fail fast. So there's method for you to actually test and learn to fail fast. But as long as you take the learnings and apply to them, then it's fine. And so how do we get into this beautiful world, magnificent place of products? So I started, just, expressing my interests around different product areas. Got lucky with a startup, and again, got lucky with my manager noticing that I was working in a startup, was really, really keen. I asked them, why did you give me the product role? I had no corporate background. They said, well, you look like you were bloody hungry, so let's give it a shot. So I was quite lucky to have that kind of that chance. But express your opinion. If you're working with product owners or product managers, express your interest, and I think they'll be happy to kind of show you the path of product management, because it's actually quite exciting to have someone to say, hey, I really want to get into your space, because sometimes it can be quite lonely, because you do feel like you're the lonely soul trying to pave that direction and try to work through and help your team through that. There are a lot of entry roles out there as well. So if you're a BA, the BA is, I call my BA, you're my pseudo PO. If I'm not around, you make the calls, how we think, how we make decisions. So these BA PO roles are really, really quite kind of very similar. It's a great, it's almost a very good transition path. There are producer roles out there, junior roles that can look after and understand kind of the platform, enhancing, optimizing. So that's a really good entry point as well. And also I find that a lot of product or designers, they have also this really good thinking around how the product structure could work with their UX background and their customer experience background. So if you're a designer out there, most definitely that's almost a similar path as well. But don't forget the community. So community like this, join as much as you like and learn from a lot of people. I've actually gone through a few courses as well, just to get myself kind of get the learning. So I haven't done the General Assembly, but I believe they've got I think it was a 10-week long product introduction course, which is quite, the syllabus is actually quite good. I've done the Scrum Alliance one, which is really, really good. If you work in a team of Scrum or Agile, it's a really nice, easy transition path to get into the product space or to understand with this course. Lots of LinkedIn learnings. So there's some free courses online as well if you want to have a go. But yeah, that's it from me.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. Hey, I know we've only got very little time. I think we had, I'm not sure, Sammy, if we've had any questions, but if we haven't, I've got one for all of you, really, Teresa, Jules, and Thomas. I think, for a scale up, it's quite important. I think you've all talked about tech debt. Can you guys tell us some secrets on how to get tech debt prioritized and take people on the journey? Because often, like, you find that a company has grown and grown and grown because they're focusing on customer acquisition or activation and just at any cost. And then we get to a point where, like, there's so much tech debt that to change something, it just takes so long, and then you fall into other problems. But to actually get that bit of tech debt prioritized is a massive issue, because you have to convince quite a few people, often without the knowledge that you have, that this is really important for the future. Can you guys give us any secrets on that?
Certainly telling the story. From my perspective, at least, it was a particularly hard sell because I had very enthusiastic CEO and board who were looking at the big players in China who have incredibly intricate and sophisticated platforms that have 500 million plus monthly active users. They have tiering, gamification, social networks, and they were just pointing at that and saying, that's what we need. So to fend off the shiny stuff in favor of ultimately the boring stuff, which is technical debt is a hard sell, but you need to explain it in the context. To one of Julian's points, you need to explain how we got into the situation, what it means for users, and the path forward, and to also be showing that each element of that technical debt being fixed will result in some tangible improvement, be it operationally from an expense perspective, or a reduction in, an increase in throughput, or an improvement in some of your key business metrics. You need to appreciate that they're not being malicious by just wanting something else other than the tech debt. They just don't have that context, and they don't have that appreciation. And so definitely to start on that journey to explain it, but come armed with data, come armed with standards, come armed with the right information to tell that story.
I think I would add, Thomas, I think you need to be patient and you need to be honest. I think I had where I am at the moment at Equium, I inherited a platform, and so I was getting mixed signals. I was saying, your CEO was saying it's great, it's not a problem with Drupal, we're off to go. And I don't have religion on code, on languages anymore, or platforms anymore. So fine, we're in Drupal, fine, whatever. I actually got the guys to I used some of my old skills from my Scrum and Agile days, and said, all right, we're going to bootstrap a project here. Absolute discipline. This is. I know that if we follow this process, we're going to get this result because it's well trodden. This was a very, very simple feature, and at the end of 4 weeks, we had 2 fields on the screen, 2 new fields on the screen at the end of 6 weeks. And I just pointed the whiteboard out at the retro and got the team to acknowledge that this was not something I could use to base a roadmap in terms of planning from, because if it was going to cost me 3 weeks per field, we're never going to get there. To Thomas's point around looking at other competitors and what they have, you say, I can't build a roadmap based on that velocity. So, and then there was this sharing with the business guys. We can't keep working on this cluster of mess. We have to do something. Then the question becomes, what's next? And that's where the hard decisions come in. But the first decision is stop adding to it. All right, just stop. So next time you get a really strategic feature, you have to figure out a way not to rewrite the platform that's going to take an N number of times and probably a number of hours and probably fail. But let's build this critical feature the way we want to go forward, in an isolated way, in a service, whatever it is you need to do. And it's going to hurt, and the identity management for the users is going to be shitty, and there's going to be pain points. The engineers have to suck up that pain. So it's not going to be a beautiful architecture. It's going to be a bastard. We're going to have this thing over here that was the old crap that you built, so you should be living with it. And we're going to have this new shiny thing on here, but we can't get too excited about that. And then it literally, using that approach, it took me 3 years to keep adding the new bits that the rest of the stuff finally just starts eating away. And we just cut it off and stop using it. And then you do one sort of final push to get it over the line. But that requires patience. And that goes to the plan that I talked about. If you know that's the direction you're going in, then looking at all that context, what's the next step to head in that direction? It mightn't be the straight line, but at least you're heading slowly in that direction you want to go. And then your tech debt, you just leave behind as you go in that direction.
I really like that.
Yeah, it's the same. The funny thing you guys talk about is we write a lot of reasoning and option papers for the business, because for them is speed to market all the time, more features. But yes, exactly. It's really like what Thomas and Jules said, is the story that you've got to play it back to them, is like the platform is going to suffer if we don't fix these tech debts. And with COVID, our business really changed their behavior from, not thinking about digital, who cares about the technology, the back end that stands up our platform, to really, all right, let's get serious about this. So we are, every quarter, we do, prioritize our tech debt to make sure that, we can actually speed up our speed to market for the future roadmaps.
That's awesome. I actually saw this funny joke. It said, who led your digital transformation? And answer A was like CTO, the answer B was CIO, and answer C was COVID-19. And I thought that was really funny, but it is accelerating what a lot of organizations around the world are doing. And, you know, and it's helping them, and they're reprioritizing, you know, things such as, you know, tech debt that is not enabling them to scale as fast. So we have two other questions, which I'm going to ask for from our crowd. One is for Teresa. What was the learning you took from your last project?
The learning I took from my last project is probably tell the story a bit better. So for us, you know, digital is very to themselves within the business, and we realized that the rest of the business didn't really understand digital. I mean, some people have a phone, they use Facebook, that was pretty much it. So being able to articulate and translate into more of a business revenue format for the leadership team is really, really important, because that's where you're going to get your buy-in, that's where you're going to get all your revenue, or not your revenue, your investment, but also painting that picture of early investment with a high, you know, amount of money into the technology. In future, we can actually scale a lot faster and go to market quicker.
Cool. And second question was around the best tip to move away from a feature factory to an outcome focus.
I'll start that one only because I'm in that right now, and that is to ask to see the evidence of the current way working. So if you're put the burden of evidence on them to say, all right, well, you know, the way we're behaving, the way we're producing software, value, whatever, you know, how are we measuring this? How do we know that we're moving in the right direction? How do we know that this is helping take us to the business goals? As opposed to the argument that this is how we've done it, or we've always done it this way, and so why should we change? Definitely trying to start by shedding light on the lack of insight that drives feature factories often. That it will typically not be driven by data or insights or anything to do with the user or customers, is the starting point, I think, to help them understand that that's not product development.
Yeah.
I would also add, you can, if you've got so many features being thrown at you, and I have lived that, and it's no fun. With if you can't always win the battle to stop the work being done, and it's because you can't make other people in the business do their jobs, unfortunately, much as I would love to. So sometimes if you're not getting that research, if you're not getting the stuff pulled through for the decision making, you can at least control what you can control, right? So if you're on the delivery side, you can control the feature development, great. But somewhere else in the organization, you've got to be able to track the metrics, right? And to Tom's point, you walk into a place with no metrics, that has to be fixed. That's almost a given. I should have added that somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. If you aren't measuring this stuff, you go home. And I think and I have done this through some success, not always, depends on the personalities. But if you've got the feature factory coming in, you let some go through to the keeper. So, all right, you can have this. What is your definition of success? How are we going to measure that? And how long is it going to take? Is it going to take you 3 weeks, 3 months, 18 months? All right, what is going to be the success criteria? And then it's not pretty, but you just hold it over them. You say, guys, I've given you 3. And we're 0 for 3 at the moment in terms of your feature request. So we're going to look elsewhere for great ideas on what we're going to build next, because we need to not waste time. Those things haven't generated any value. So by your own success criteria, we're going to look elsewhere. So you've had your chance. We're going to use a different process or go to a different person to get the next feature request. It's not pretty, but it can get the job done.
Yeah, same to Jules's point. So we used to be more of an order taker in that department. So features coming thrown at us, and they had no understanding of our platform, how everything mirrors together for a customer journey perspective. So what we're doing is changing the way we work, and we actually embed ourselves with the business at a very, very early stage, looking at what are our quarterly objectives and metrics, and how we're going to deliver these metrics through different channels, whether it's frontline retail, and digital is one of them as well. So from being an order taker to actually the one that creates the menu is where we're kind of positioning the way we're working in our organization.
That's really awesome. I think that for all of this, data is like a hygiene factor. I know, and it'll remain unnamed who I'm talking about, but in one of my previous roles, they had no data, and revenue was going up, and convinced that we were doing the right thing. But I kept coming back to this, like, we need the data. It's not necessarily what we're doing. It's just you've got a really good sales team and your salesmanship is incredible. But the product, the features, they're just the features. We don't know which one's working and which one's not. And in fact, there's like 150 that probably haven't been used in the last 10 years. And we don't know that because we don't have any data. And I think that's also important for the scale factor. Like, you got to be able to know what's being used and what's not being used, so you can sort of continually simplify your product and not make it overly complex. That's been awesome, guys. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm sure everyone else has as well. Thank you very much for spending Friday afternoon with us. Hopefully you can enjoy a beer or wine or a water, whatever your preference is. And hopefully in 2 weeks' time, we'll have another one, and you guys can tell your friends to join. If you've got any feedback, please feel free to message me or Sammy. We're always happy to take any feedback on and continue to improve. We might try and send out a survey as well. This is our first go, so a couple of technical issues on my side. I'm working from my laptop. I'm working from my mobile because nothing worked on my laptop, but hopefully everyone else had a smoother experience. Thanks very much, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks, Sammy, as well, and thanks to all the speakers.
Thanks,
Great.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
See ya.
guys.
Thanks.
Awesome. Have a
Yeah.
lovely weekend. Bye bye.
See ya.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.